There we are.
Yeah.
Your slides are back on my.
Yeah, me, then Joseph, then.
Okay. Well, after you do the introductions on everything,
Yeah.
then just tell me.
Yeah.
And then I'm not ready to do announcing.
Is there anything else to remember?
I'll just announce that we'll be back.
Okay. Wait. Thanks, David. Oh. That worked. That's definitely. Yeah, we had them here for a while. Wait. Okay. Does work.
Everybody's used to the library.
Yeah. Library. We're up there.
Yeah.
In Rockets.
You're the.
Yeah.
All right, we're ready whenever you are. We're recording.
Okay, great. I'll wait another minute. Yeah. I love you guys. 3 minutes.
Fine.
10 minutes. Yeah. There is one. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, right? You're right, advice. Yeah.
So Bruce, it'll just pick us up. We don't need it'll go straight to it. That's so great. Love that. All right, everybody, we're gonna get started. Hey, everybody, I'm Nate. I'm on the board of HANC. Hi. We're gonna get started. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
How about online? Everybody online can hear okay? Great.
So we are going to talk about the upzoning, but first we're gonna have announcements. I'll make one announcement, which is that these meetings are normally at the Park Branch Library, and they will be back at the Park Branch Library next week or next month on the third Thursday, right? At this time. So normally we're at the Park Branch Library, and we will be back at the Park Branch Library the second Thursday. Thank you, David. Next month. Is there any other announcements? Yes.
As usual, I'm Peter. Libraries are, like a lot of things, back. For aware of that, I support our library. I think ours is one of the richest libraries. The voter has, measured the library preservation fund, so it has a guaranteed stream of income that even the supervisors can cut. But I'm very concerned about the library, standing up for what it's principally, what it, actually says that it does. And, if anybody wants to, talk about that more, we're on that. I think there's some instant, you've heard me talk about things that the library doesn't do that are part of what would expect on to do or what they say they do, but then always issues about not, protecting people's privacy, specifically, not providing equal access to folks. For example, if you're less, technically connected, more and more titles and materials books are going only, on e-text. Or Kindles or something, if you don't have easy access to that. Too bad the library won't provide that in most cases. What they did at the Hartford Valley Branch basically was to cut out the homeless folks by cutting off the Wi-Fi after hours. Because the neighbors didn't want to have the folks hanging around after hours. And that's the only branch that has cut off the Wi-Fi. So all the folks in that, you know, hang out. I did want to mention Jack Bell. There's a local guy who lives on the same block here. He's one of the grandkids in photographs at the Haight-Ashbury. Park Branch took it on. And he's having downstairs, unfortunately, they're not very accessible. No really celebration or planting room party. And it was disturbing to me that, while the local folks put out a nice little brochure, that included some of his recent donations, photographic ones. There's nothing in the catalog that indicates that collection exists in the library, so somebody will look up Jack Van Olstein. So anyway, if anybody wants to work on that, they want to look at some of these concerns, support for the library, but also working to make sure that they fulfill, you know, what they say they're doing. What used to be free access, the joys of reading and other things. I'd be happy for.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate that. Is there any other announcements? Apologize that we're just gonna have to do our best to project because that's the situation here in order to hear each other. Is there any other announcement? Okay. Seeing none, we will move on to our main event, which I will introduce with some slides. Followed by Joseph Snook of the Race and Equity and All Planning Coalition and Catherine Petrin, who I believe is joining us after that from Neighborhoods United San Francisco. So, is there a way to make it bigger? Maybe not. Well, that's okay. So next slide, please. I'm just basically want to introduce you guys to the topic of what we're talking about today. The crux of it is that due to a whole bunch of changes to state law over the last decade, the city is required to upzone to accommodate 36,000 additional units. This process had been going on before. It's the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, the RHNA number, which is supposed to be a calculation of the housing need by income level, which is a very important thing and something that we should absolutely be striving to meet. And it identifies housing needs for low income and moderate income and above moderate income households. And Joseph can say more about that later, but this current cycle, the number of units that we are required to facilitate or zone for has doubled. And this is a slide created by the planning department, which says on the left, that's the requirement that the city is supposed to deliver in some way, even though it's not really up to us whether they get built, that, you know, except for the public side. But, and on the right, what that means is that 58,000 units have already been fully entitled and sit in the pipeline, and they're not being built because, for the large part, it's because market rate developers are not building anything because rents are not high enough to justify their development. And that is the chief reason. There's also cost of materials, construction, and land. And so those, although they are ready to be built, and luckily we get to count them toward this number, but the number is so high that we have to rezone by January 30th of the next year. So in 1 year's time, we are required by the state to rezone to accommodate an additional 36,000 units. The important thing about that is that they are supposed to be affordable to 20,000 low-income households. However, the plan that will be put before the Board of Supervisors at some point later this year, or the latest iteration of it, is almost entirely market rate development, relying only on inclusionary zoning that has been cut year after year to deliver the affordable part. So they say that we need this many units, and the only way that they're proposing to deliver them does not anywhere reach the affordable or moderate income household needs. So that's what that's the basic thing that's going on here. Next slide. I just wanted to share a map of what it is. It affects a very large chunk of the city. The most recent iteration added all of the residential areas in blue, which were previously excluded. But growth is anticipated and concentrated on neighborhood commercial corridors like Cape Street or Pole or, Inner Clement, etc. And we can talk more about that. But the next slide has, I think, the hate blown up so you can see in more detail what is proposed for the blocks around us. Basically, they are proposing 6 stories on Haight and Stanyan and all around the Coal Valley zone, and 5 stories is that lighter buffer zone area, which includes 1 block from all of the neighborhood commercial areas, and then density decontrol, which means allowing as many units as you can fit that are code compliant within the 40-foot height limit of the blue areas. But there's a big caveat. There's a couple of asterisks which I added because they're there, but they don't put them on the map, which is also that you can go up to 6 stories in any residential area if it's an 8,000 square foot lot and you're allowed to do lot mergers. So it is possible for the developers to assemble larger parcels and build, it's hard to imagine in this neighborhood, but like a 6-story apartment block that merges a bunch of lots.
Or density.
And I want to make one further point before handing it over to Joseph in the next slide, which I think is really important, and it's kind of deep in the weeds, but Oh, yeah, well, a concern that we have is around neighborhood serving businesses and what will happen to small businesses and tenants who could be displaced through this sort of redevelopment. And the prime targets, the kind of most likely to be displaced are single story businesses, including some grocery stores, hardware stores, and etc. So there's an effort to try to make sure that either their displacement is prevented or that we end up with a mix of neighborhood serving businesses, which has, you know, been part of the zoning of this neighborhood for a long time. And there's more to be said about that. One other footnote, really quick, for if you're in the final slide, that I just want to point out because it's not clear from the planning materials that there's something about density decontrol that's not immediately evident. What density decontrol means is that you are allowed to build as many units within the building envelope as meets the planning code and the building code. That sounds nice and is fine, you know, on its face. However, it does something. They're proposing to grant this in exchange for nothing on the NCDs, the neighborhood commercial districts. And the issue with it is that it allows for developers to waive a lot of other parts of the planning code, including the height limit, and it could create buildings that are significantly different than the ones that the planning code is saying that they're trying to incentivize, which we should just be transparent about. For example, Amoeba sits on a 26,000 square foot lot, and on the left is imagining the buildable envelope. Imagine that that's 4 stories. That's what you could build now. There is a rear yard, you know, requirement, but imagine that that's, you know, a crude illustration of what you could build. And then also right now you can build the state density bonus, you can double it, you get double density, but with form-based density, it makes it a lot easier for them it changes the way they calculate this, and it makes it easier for developers to reconfigure the building envelope, the buildable envelope, so that you could actually create, and I did the math earlier on this, you could actually build a 16-story tower on Amoeba just by granting density decontrol. And I just want people to understand that, because that's not what the planning department is saying that they're trying to encourage. And I think they should not be giving that away in exchange for nothing, and not being clear with people about what it is, the kind of, you know, what sorts of things you can build. Anyway, so that's just a side note about what's possible. So basically that one on the right, you can't build it right now, but you could under their proposal, and even though they don't say that. And the way you do it is by like only having, you know, 50% or less lot coverage and making it taller. And this has happened a lot on the northeast side of town, where developers want to, you know, generate bay views and high per square foot condos and stuff, that it's just a totally different thing than what the planning department says they want to create, which is mid-rise development that fits into neighborhoods. And they're talking, you know, 4 to 6, 6 to 8. So I just wanted to make those points, and I'm very happy that Joseph Smoot was able to join us. And I'm not really prepared to introduce you, so please do so yourself if you don't mind.
Yeah, thanks, Nate. So that was a great overview of what planning is proposing and kind of what's in front of us. I'm going to dig into a little bit of analysis of this, kind of what it means on the ground, and some of the background as well. So just want to introduce, as Nate said earlier, I'm with the Race and Equity in All Planning Coalition. Which is a coalition of 40 organizations, and some coalitions from throughout the city, and HANC is one of the members of the Race and Equity and Planning Coalition, so I'm honored to be here with you all. I do want to, oh, Bruce, if you could just, well, when you have a chance. So the mission of the Race and Equity and Planning Coalition, I think it's important to kind of ground these comments in our mission, which is to build a future in San Francisco with diverse communities, stable, affordable housing, and equitable access to resources and opportunities. And the Race and Equity and Planning Coalition, other things, has been advocating and organizing around the housing element since we formed in August of 2020. So I'm going to be building, as I said, off of Nate's presentation with some analysis, kind of where REP sees some of the flaws in planning's approach, and then we'll also provide an overview of our recommendations and the focus of our advocacy going forward. So it's important to kind of emphasize, like, where do these numbers come from? Kind of what did we kind of actually experience? So this housing element thing, these numbers, it's not a new thing. We keep going through 8-year cycles, and most of us in San Francisco don't even know that it happens. That we have these 8-year allocations of development targets from the state. So I just want to give us some grounding in the last full housing element cycle, which ended in January of 2023. Market rate developers built nearly twice as much expensive housing as the state demanded. At the same time, we only built about half of the affordable units that we were supposed to. And during that time, when developers built twice as much of the housing they were supposed to build, they didn't have all the streamlining, incentives, and upzoning during that 8-year period. So all of these new tools that have come from the state and from our local government, from City Hall, all of these new tools that have been gifted to developers in the last 2 years have resulted in a pipeline. So that pipeline number that Nate showed earlier that had 58,000, it's now ballooned to 70,000. The latest report from planning shows that there are 70,000 units in the pipeline. So all of these incentives and tools that developers have, all it's done is it's inflated our pipeline, and it hasn't moved any, like, developers were building more in the last cycle. And as Nate said, it's because it's all due to market conditions. As much as the city and the state want to give developers tools and giveaways, it doesn't matter. They're just going to build when they can make a profit. Next slide. Another thing that I'm sure you all have heard is that there's a housing crisis because there's a shortage. We don't have enough housing. And so I wanted to make sure to show this slide because all of these incentive streamlining and upzoning measures we're told are necessary so that market rate development can flood the market somehow. So the market rate developers can kind of flood the market with all of the housing that supposedly we don't have. So right. So the basic reality of how things work is kind of exhibited by this slide. So this shows kind of what happened between 1950 and 2020. And the reason why that's significant is that, of course, between 1950 and 1980, highways and BART made it possible for people with money to be able to move out of San Francisco. So they did. And the population of San Francisco in 1950 was just over 775,000 people. And the population of San Francisco decreased and then it rebounded. But it wasn't until the 2000 census that the population of San Francisco got back to 775,000 people. Okay. And when you look at this kind of period of decline and stagnation in population, developers kept building. They kept building housing. And what this chart shows is that during the period of 1950 to 2020, there was nearly 1.5 units of housing built for every new person in San Francisco. So it's hard to reconcile that with a narrative that somehow we have a housing shortage. When developers have built almost 1.5 units for every increase in person in population in San Francisco. And during that period of time, household incomes doubled, but housing prices increased sixfold. So there's obviously another story that's happening here. It's not because we have a housing shortage, it's because of financialization of housing over this period, which completely changed the whole housing market changed. And also we had a lack of purpose-built affordable housing. And so what we have is not a housing supply shortage, we have a housing affordability shortage. And just wanted to make sure that everybody knows that this table that's up on the slide right now is not from some kind of lefty ideological publication that's attempting to kind of fabricate numbers to fit a narrative. This chart is from the housing element, from the planning department's housing element environmental impact report, and the data is straight from the US Census. So this isn't fabricated, it's real life. So next slide. Okay, so unfortunately, this lack of a plan to provide purpose-built affordable housing is continuing. And this provides further background why Rep feels like planning has approached this housing element under the wrong premise. That instead of asking, how can we mobilize the tools of planning and the expertise of historically marginalized communities to maximize the amount of affordable housing and build strong and resilient communities, planning without pushing back against orders from the state set out to use zoning to incentivize, streamline, and upzone for as much expensive market rate housing as possible. So this leaves us with a housing element that has no affordable housing plan. So even though 57% of all the new housing in this 8-year cycle that we're currently in, which is nearly 47,000 units, is supposed to be affordable for households with extremely low to moderate incomes, the city and state have absolutely no affordable housing plan. The governor keeps cutting funding for affordable housing programs. And despite our advocacy directly to Assemblymember Philtane and directly to State Senator Scott Wiener, and Philtane, as we remember, was the Assembly Budget Chair, and Scott Wiener was the Senate Budget Chair, they were able to find absolutely zero money for affordable housing. So now the legislature in Sacramento is talking about putting a $10 billion bond from the 2026 ballot. Not only is $10 billion a tiny amount compared to the statewide needs for truly affordable housing, but a bond isn't a sustained commitment of state resources for affordable housing. So all we're left with from what Nate presented earlier is a plan that will result in roughly 12% to 16% of the units being affordable rather than 57%. Next slide. So Scott Wiener and the YIMBYs and planning and the mayor keep trying to scare us into accepting this fate of not having any affordable and being forced to accept this upzoning plan by saying that if we don't permit or build the tens of thousands of units the state has directed us to build, then the state could take over our planning department and developers can build wherever they want by using this thing called the builder's remedy. And the state only cares about holding San Francisco accountable to the total number of units, not the fact that we need the majority of all housing to be affordable. But despite the scare tactics, Senator Wiener has already made sure that the state has already taken over the planning department. And with all the density bonuses already in place that Nate described and showed in the diagrams, especially the state density bonus and this AB 1287 and the density decontrol, developers can already build pretty much whatever they want. So this, what's showing up on the slide, is just a partial list of bills that Wiener and his colleagues have put in place. And there are 20 more moving through the legislature right now. Plus, there have already been local zoning measures such as home SF, the fourplex and sixplex, and measures to enable accessory dwelling units. Next slide. So these actions by the state and the city have already increased speculation, and increased speculation leads to increased displacement of small businesses and of tenants. Because of the leadership of Commissioner Teresa Imperial on the Planning Commission, she took action to instruct the planning staff to hold separate hearings on tenant displacement and small business displacement. And she's been participating in meetings between the community and planning staff on those issues. There's actually been significant legislation that we're working on to address both of those issues. But existing and new state laws from the state legislature preempt a lot of the protections that we've been striving for. So our approach is to kind of push both of these ordinances as far as we can, and kind of making a list of things that we're going to be then following up on to try to change state law. So in addition to that, and this is the complete advocacy list that were the top level things that the Race and Equity and All Planning Coalition is prioritizing. And I just want to note that there are going to be informational hearings at the Planning Commission in June and July. So it's going to be important to attend those hearings or write letters and let the planning commissioners and the board of supervisors know that these things are important, if they are important to you. So the first one is to demand truly permanently affordable housing. The next is to commit new significant multi-year funding from the state and from the city for affordable housing. The next is to aggressively purchase sites for affordable housing development. REP has a new organizing effort that we call Claiming Space for Community, which is going to be to organize communities around sites identified by communities, community organizations like HANC for affordable housing and other community development ambitions, and bring the coalition together to support claiming those sites for affordable housing. Another one is to restrict that public lands be used for 100% affordable housing, including SFMTA sites, which we know MTA wants to get rid of 25 of their sites for luxury housing. The next is to commit increased funding for tenant counseling and legal defense for tenants. Also pass the strong tenant protections legislation and the strong legislation to protect and support small businesses that I mentioned. And then the last is to amend or repeal state laws such as the Ellis Act, Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act, SB 330, which is the Housing Crisis Act, SB 828 to change the way these numbers are allocated, SB 423 that streamlines market rate housing. There's a lot of things we need to do at the state level. And so I'll stop there.
Thank you, Joseph. So we are going to break things up, and we can take a couple of questions now and then go to Catherine, Pastor Catherine after that. If anyone has any questions so far. Yes, hi.
Yeah, I was have a question about displacement.
Yes,
You showed a picture of Robert Hardware.
yes,
They own the building.
yes.
So are you talking about eminent domain or?
No. I think in the case of places that own the building, I think what I mean is a real estate developer could come to them and say, hey, you know, the value of your land just increased. Now you can build this other thing here. We will give you this. And maybe, you know, even if it is owned by them for the longest time, it'll change their calculation about it. I think that's the idea there.
But there's nothing in the legislation that says forcing them from the land.
No. No, I think the displacement is primarily of small businesses at least, which is about 80% of small businesses, and tenants who, you know, currently live there.
But this is really interesting, actually, a question and answer, because it was like during the time of redevelopment that the state would use eminent domain to realize these kinds of ambitions. But what this whole mechanism that they're setting up is basically to privatize those kinds of actions. So that's what Nate's describing, is that this is creating incentives, all of these zoning changes, the incentives and streamlining, all this creating kind of an environment where then the private market is incentivized to take actions that the state did during redevelopment.
There was, there was kind of a nice warm fuzzy feeling at the last board of supervisors meeting of last year between Mandelman and outgoing our supervisor, Captain. Where Mandelman said that there's one thing that they can agree on, which is that if they want to see, if the government wants to see affordable housing, that the government needs to invest in. And so the ideas that, like, what on the side, what we need to do, like, I'd like to hear more about ways that we can push the government to fund more affordable housing projects.
No, it's a really good question, thanks. I think advocating, there's kind of an ideology right now that's kind of behind a lot of this, which is to diminish the role of government. And basically deregulate market rate housing, hand over to the private market, kind of all of these tools to kind of unleash the market, if you will. I think that advocacy and the money behind it is so powerful right now that what we need to do is just organize, and we need to send a clear message and a consistent message, both to our state legislators and to City Hall, to tell them that it doesn't work. That the only way to actually get affordable housing is to invest in it. And it can't just be a short-term investment either. It can't just be, okay, well, we got the DMV site and let's all have, a celebration around the DMV site or, the McDonald's site. And then it's just plain victory because we just got one thing built. But actually demand a sustained, kind of ongoing investment. So, but I think it's gonna take all of us over, yeah.
Is the SF Public Bank a part of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, making sure that those resources are managed in a democratic way, so that we actually have some say as a city over how those assets get managed. Yeah, that'd be huge.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
In the back. Yes.
How long did it take to organize the McDonald's site to make it what it is now? By how many years? And what was the backstory of that, just roughly? Because that's good, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Does anyone know the exact number? Maybe 5 years?
About 5. HANC hosted a number of community meetings in that 5-year time because we wanted people who live in the neighborhood to come and weigh in on what they wanted. I mean, we really wanted people to participate in the process because so often at City Hall, what we hear is, planning and the developers are gonna decide. And we're like, yeah, but we live here. I mean, so, and they were well attended. I mean, and after the fact now, a lot of people are grousing about what was built, but maybe a lot of them didn't come to the community meetings. And I know that we're all busy people, but this is a community meeting. I think this is informative.
All these meetings are familiar on what's called Sunshine. All these meetings are recorded, all the City Hall meetings, all that stuff, are recorded. They have to be by law.
Oh, yes, I watch them.
Right.
Yeah, or go to them. Yeah. And I think more people should because, I don't know, it feels like people are too busy to participate, and I think that's problematic.
What happens to the question? What happens if you buy one of those houses across the road? Does it stay if you buy it at 150,000 or something? What happens after 5 or 10 years when you sell it? Do you get a price back plus cost of living, or how do they calculate what you can sell for? Sell people.
It's indexed based on there's like a target income level for the household that it's supposed to be serving. And so that gets adjusted by every year.
Consumer price index.
Because a certain percentage each year according to inflation or local market or something, but
Yeah.
it keeps it within the realm of being affordable.
By the CPI.
Yeah,
Consumer
and I,
price index, same way they do rent control.
I think that's a good question too about the McDonald's site, because what the city did was they lied they handpicked it and they held it for the purpose of developing that affordable housing. But then once you come in and upzone, you immediately create the value for land, which makes those sites more competitive and it makes it harder and more expensive also for the city to then, right? So it creates more competition for limited sites that there are, and it should be prioritized.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Okay,
Oh, okay.
back to you.
Sorry, I'm super new to this, but, I'm really interested in following up on that question. Is the zoning, like, how does that play with affordable housing? Like, if you have an affordable project, is it subject to the same zoning, or would upzoning mean that you could have 6 stories of market or 6 stories of affordable, and then it's, it's up to whatever happens next? Or is it like, actually, it would make it easier for more affordable units to build too? Like, how does that play?
What they have proposed in this plan is to give everybody the same thing, and that is a problem because it inflates the land value to whatever the market rate developer can generate from it, which makes it harder to develop affordable housing for that same height. There are other mechanisms that are meant to privilege affordable housing in zoning, and that is better. Like, we have a density bonus program and other, that was able to achieve higher zoning, because, higher heights because it's affordable. And that makes more sense because of, treating them differently doesn't affect the land value. Yeah.
So today, like, if this map did go through, then today, if you were building affordable, like, could you get up to 6 units or sorry, 6 stories or?
Yes.
No, not
But-
necessarily. Well, 6 stories, yeah, but you couldn't get to the 16 because the density decontrol, there are different rules that affordable housing developers have to follow based on the funding sources that they get. They have different rules in terms of the size of the units that they have to provide. So it's a little bit different.
I'm not sure how they got to 8 exactly, but if somebody wants to fill in, yeah. Is there another? Yes.
One, seemingly on like a lot of these, so like, for example, like, condos could be built, let's say, because you built 100 condos, you put 7% offsite for the cost, right? On a lot of those deeds, it says this will be affordable housing for 50 years, also repetitive.
Yeah.
Is there anything to say like, forever, like, it's like some understanding, but then like.
Yes. Do you want to take that, Calvin?
Yeah, the way you have public findings. The findings, fewer have a own or the way of who should be. I had go through all land, days of the land, private house. Private house market is based on ever increases on 50 years.
Yes.
The only way to do the permanent for the house is to remove the house that land from the speculative housing. I call it.
So, sorry for the folks online who are unable to hear it. The question was, why are some affordable housing deed restrictions, why do they expire? And it's connected to the source of funding, and federal funding and low-income housing tax credits have a certain year attached to them, but we changed it locally so that they are affordable for the life of the project, but it depends on the source of the funding. And I think we should go to our final presenter, who is Catherine Petrin, and we can have more discussion after that. Thank you. No.
There's no
This
microphone.
microphone goes to online, but we don't have a way to project your voice here, I'm sorry to say.
That's okay, that's
But-
okay.
It's hard.
No problem. Nate, did you by chance print out those?
Yes,
Okay.
they're all,
Behind you.
there's that, and then they're all out in the back. Do you want me to bring you one?
No, I
Yeah,
just
that's
want to
fine.
be sure that people can take it if they want. And I
Okay.
also would like to pass out these,
Sure.
if you don't mind, and these.
Sure.
If you take it, if you read it, it's all good. If not, that's okay too. And these.
Sure.
Lots of information. So. Hi, everybody. It's really nice to be here. My name is Catherine Petrin. I am an architectural historian by training. And in the last year and a half, I have found myself educating myself about what the hell is going on. So Joseph and Nate have given you a lot of information, nitty gritty and numbers and percentages and affordable. Maybe I can give you a little bit of a bigger picture to explain how did we get here? What's happening? How come we've had no voice in what's happening? And to really understand like what this is all about. If I'm saying stuff that you already know, just do this and I'll go faster. I've got a bunch of slides and we can look at them, but really I just want to give you a bigger picture and to share with you what I've learned in the last year and a half. So as I said, I'm an architectural historian. I pay attention to historic buildings. I'm often in collaboration or conversation with our city supervisors and the planning department, mostly like looking for protections for historic buildings, because that's kind of what I do. And so I had been paying attention to the housing element in a kind of very narrow way. And so, as you all know, we have this element, housing element. It is one sort of chapter of our overall general plan of San Francisco, just focusing on housing. And we revise it, review it every 8 years. So, you know, I knew that. And I also knew that in San Francisco, for decades, we have been overbuilding market rate, luxury housing, however you want to call it, the expensive stuff. We've been overbuilding that, and we've been underbuilding housing for low income, very low income, and moderate income people for a long time. We are in an incredible crisis of affordability. As Joseph said, as Nate said, we are not in a crisis of housing units. We aren't. We have enough housing for the people who live here. We have a declining population. We have skyrocketing prices. We have at least 50,000 units of housing for a variety of reasons that are not on the market. We have normal, you know, housing that just goes up and up and up as people invest in it. It's not about a house to live in anymore. This is all about investment. And we are looking at a tsunami of money that people have been, entities, financial entities have been privileged and have, I'll just say, gamed the system over many, many years, and it's created the situation that we're in now. We know that concentrated wealth disrupts the housing market, not only in San Francisco, but nationwide. Inequality.org has a very good paper about how concentrated wealth disrupts the housing market nationwide. We also hear so let's just step back and say, in about 2017, 2018, the state, what do my slides say? What's the next slide say? I'm not really paying attention to the slides, but I really should introduce, it's important to introduce to you, and then we'll come back to the housing crisis. I want to introduce to you Neighborhoods United SF. And so about a year and a half ago, this group formed very quickly. And within a short period of time, we became over 60 civic organization homeowners groups small business protection groups, tenants protection groups, and now we're working with faith-based organizations. The reason why I really want you to know, and you guys have had a couple of handouts about Neighborhoods United SF, is because we put out really good, plain spoken information about this situation. So go there, sign up, you'll get our newsletters. We work with REP, we work with local groups. Last year, 2024, we did 8 town hall meetings, town hall style meetings all over the city, because we realized that people don't know about this. This has been done under the radar. And that kind of really pissed me off when I realized that people didn't know and it was intentional. So the mission of Neighborhoods United SF is to educate and activate and grow our group so that we can all have some say in what is happening to our city. So in 2017, so that last slide just talks about what we're doing, pushing back on upzoning, because upzoning is thoughtless planning. It's not a good way to do planning. In 2017, this housing crisis was declared, and basically that when any kind of crisis happens, the state can exert emergency powers. And when a housing crisis was declared, that basically said that the state had the power to take over our planning department, our planning, our zoning, and to dictate to us and to every other one of the 495 cities in California how they were going to do planning and how they were going to grow more housing. Housing production is a good thing. We do need more housing, but the way that it's happening is all wrong, and it's about privileging. It's about deregulation is what it's about. It's about wealth extraction and all that. So let's see. So our goal is to expose this narrative, to explain that we have an affordability crisis and not a housing crisis. The kind of easy narrative is that San Francisco has not done its part to do housing, but we have. We have built 58,000 units of housing since 2005. And we're mandated, I think you know this because everybody now knows, 82,000 new units of housing by 2031. Of that, 46,000 are supposed to be affordable, and that 46,000 units of affordable housing would cost about $19 billion. To answer the earlier question, the state is not funding that. It's an unfunded mandate, and it's unconstitutional. So let's see, what else can I tell you? What's our next slide say? Okay, so there was another question about number of affordable units per project. So this project is proposed at 777 Sutter Street. It's at the site of the former Fleur de Lis restaurant. It's a 1 or 2 story building, perfect for infill housing, perfect for redevelopment. The lot measures 35 by 100, and it's zoned for 8 stories. But if a developer wants to use some of these housing laws, they can invoke the state density bonus and get 2 to 3 times the height. And that's what's happening on this site. A 26-story building with 36 units, and 6 of them are affordable. So does that do anything to solve our affordability crisis? I would say it doesn't. This project is working through the review process and through the pipeline. And it brings up one of the questions that we ask all the time. Who are we building for? Who are we building for? Are we building for people who need these units? The top 20 stories of this building would be full floor, 5-bedroom units, extremely expensive and not for people who live here.
Penthouse.
Say that again?
Penthouse.
They have, yeah, the 360 views. That's the goal. Okay, next. So we've done a lot to increase our housing capacity. And Joseph mentioned that on this new upzoning plan, we have something called density decontrols. And basically every parcel, I know this is not a very good map, but that's colored blue, is single family home or small housing, and it could be redeveloped for 4 units or 6 units at the corners, 65 units, 65 feet at the corner unit and more. We've also implemented ADUs. That's a good thing. There's construction, a couple thousand of ADUs have been built in the last couple of years. And the other thing that we've done in the planning department is we've halved this standard lot size. So the standard lot in San Francisco used to be 25 by 100, 2,500 feet. It's now half that. So you can build on 2, you have now 2 parcels where you had 1, and you can build. There's a lot of things that lead to greater density, which asks, and which leads to the question, why do we need this upzoning plan? Next.
Sorry about that. Somebody grabbed the
Uh-huh.
writing utensil in there.
Um,
Let me see if I.
As we heard before, we have 70,000 units that have already been approved and they're not being built. These are at various different sites all over San Francisco, from the Bayview to Park Merced to Stonestown. These units are in the pipeline, but they're not being built because of financial or the moment.
Is that affordable housing?
It's a mix. Some of them are and some of them aren't. Yeah. Next.
Sorry. Somebody's still playing around with that thing.
So the real reason too that we're opposed to the upzoning plan is because we believe that it leads to eviction, displacement, and demolition. Eviction of businesses, eviction of tenants. There are some protection for rent-controlled tenants, but it's really not enough. And when you have this, when you upzone land, it makes that land so valuable that the incentive is there to buy and to demolish. Also, I just want to use an example. The city of Vancouver had a affordability housing crisis, much like what we have in 2000, and they embraced tall towers, upzoning, build, 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 the YIMBY mantra, build, build, build. And they did that. They did that in Vancouver. They built, and they overbuilt. And the biggest problem in Vancouver today is lack of affordable housing, because the units that were built were not built for the people that lived there. It's, again, same situation that we see here in a lot of our buildings. It's investment properties. It's a place to park your wealth. Yeah, next. So again, this question, who are we building for? And can you scoot it up a tiny bit? This is kind of a prime example, 1 Stuart Lane. It's a very expensive high-end housing. These buildings get built. They're not immediately sold. The developers release a unit one at a time, one at a time, one at a time. The HOA on these alone are, $2,500 a month. And buildings with elevators tend to have high HOAs. And long-term, it's not beneficial to the people. The monthly homeowner association fee on this $2.5 million 1-bedroom unit every month, the homeowner association fee is $2,500 a month. There are many amenities that are included in these buildings. They're very high end, and they're expensive to build, they're expensive to buy, and they're expensive to live in long term.
Do these remain empty?
Many of them are empty. Some are sold one at a time. And this building is not fully built out. Do you disagree that this is?
I don't think they're empty now.
Okay. There's another example at 1515 Union Street. And this is a great example of a site. It's at the corner of Union and Van Ness. I mean, what better transit serving site? And this is another example of very expensive units, $3 million units. They're released 1 or 2 at a time. And I just think that this was a real wasted opportunity because you could have built at this site something that was affordable, have more units for more people and at this really great location, but that's not what we have. We have the top penthouse views, they have Golden Gate views, and they're very expensive. Yeah, next. So I just wanted to mention in closing that, you know, people say to our group, okay, you're against upzoning, what are you for? And I passed out this sheet with 10 different actions that are positive, that talk about what we are for, investing in affordable housing, anti-speculation measures, and on and on. I'll let you read it. And the other last thing I wanted to mention is that there is a ballot initiative that we're hoping, well, it's not our group, but it's a group called Our Neighborhood Voices, and they are hoping to have a ballot measure to push back on, to revoke some of these housing laws and to get some common sense back into the planning process. So I'll leave it there, and thanks. Again, Neighborhoods United SF is the organization, and I really welcome you to join us, lend your voice, and sign up for information. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.
Sure.
All right. Good. So does anyone have any questions for Catherine? Yes.
Are there any mechanisms that can be used to make existing units affordable or transition them out of being not affordable to affordable?
The question is, are there any mechanisms to make existing units affordable?
Yes.
Or transition them, I forget the rest, but that's the gist of it, sorry. Anyone want to take that?
I can answer it. So there are a number of nonprofit affordable housing developers around the city, and they do what's called acquisition rehab or preservation housing. And basically take buildings that are up for sale, that are basically investment properties, and will convert them into hopefully home ownership. They could do home ownership, they could do co-ops, they could do TICs, whatever is financially feasible for the people that are living there, but mostly focused on folks that are at risk of being displaced. So they can age in place, and you significantly drop, because of displacement, you drop homelessness and people leaving the city.
So we're down one right here on Stadium Street, straight down the block.
Is Section 8 an answer to her question as well?
Yes, well, yeah, they can, all the nonprofit development, they can take Section 8 also.
If they buy something that's expensive, but then keep it, like they lose money on this deal as a nonprofit.
Oh, you're saying if they bought the market rate?
Do they buy at market rate?
They will buy at what the seller is trying to sell at. They will try to pencil it out to see if the population that they're trying to serve in the affordable housing sector will make it work financially. And it's just the business of real estate. You got to build for people that are either going to live there or buy it, what have you. So
they have to do a lot of fundraising in order to be.
Yes, they do fundraising, and that's why, we're talking about government funding to do this. Now, in other countries, they have social housing programs. And this is where the community kind of comes together and, helps promote affordable housing for those that are left behind. They can integrate into those communities. So there's a social housing legislation that got passed, kind of unfunded. We had a chance to do foreclosure prevention, but the legislature clawed back every last dollar. We had $30 million, and they clawed it back in one shot last year. So, that's kind of the mentality of how they think about affordable housing.
There's also, I would just mention too, the city has this small sites acquisition fund, and they can buy buildings, but there's not a whole lot of money in it, but that's the whole program.
Our last mayor pulled all the money
Yeah.
pretty much
There's
out
a
of it.
building over, wait. There's a building over there that was bought, it's really small size.
Yeah, well, there was one up in Schrader Street.
And the Community Land Trust also tries to buy buildings to keep people housed before they're sold.
Yeah, I kind of say nonprofit developers because there are other folks in the land trust that are doing the same thing.
Bruce?
Yes.
Dean Preston always talks about the Austrian example. Do you know much about that?
That's the Vienna model.
Panama, right?
Yeah, so that's kind of what we're, talking about, land banking
Mhm.
and subsidizing and having the community contribute to build permanent affordable housing.
Any other questions? Yes,
There's a hell of a lot of, empty office spaces downtown.
Yeah.
Is there an incentive or if you're working towards maybe converting those to,
yes.
Could you repeat the question?
The question was, what about the millions of square feet of empty office that are downtown? Can they be converted to housing? And the answer is that the city has done all the permissions necessary for developers to do that. The streamlining, it's all allowable by right. They did the building code equivalency, they've allowed it, and not a single developer has taken it up because it's not economically feasible for them to do it. Even though there's 2 entitled projects, one at the Warfield and I forget the other one, but they can't get the financing to do it. The city is trying to, there's now an effort to create a tax increment financing district to give public money to do those kinds of conversions. But those same developers that are trying to create that, which hurts our tax base and hurts the city tax dollars, actually, they're also trying to remove the inclusionary requirements in those buildings. So they're trying to create, if they do end up funding it, they're trying to create no affordable housing in those buildings. So there's some give and take there.
Also, in the past, we have done that in a more organic way. The Royal British Insurance Company at the corner of Sansom and Pine has been converted to residential. It's a smaller building. It's a beautiful early, a historic building, early office building, easier to convert with smaller floor plates. There's also a few good examples on New Montgomery that have been converted to residential. And also, I would say, look in it, just Google it, look it up. 25 Water Street in Lower Manhattan has just come online. It's a newly completed project of 1,300 units of housing in a former office building. I don't know too much about the dynamics and the finances. It must have been very expensive and required a lot of investment. They completely took off the whole cladding, put in new windows, but that's 1,300 units of housing and at least 300 are affordable.
What about the one at Bell and Van Ness?
100 Van Ness is another one in San Francisco at Bell and Van Ness. That has happened before rents got up, basically. Any other questions? And I've completely ignored the questions online.
There were really.
There were
there's just-
maybe some a while back.
Yeah, there was
Okay.
one on, can we, if we're gonna do this, can you keep at least some architectural character to the facades in various neighborhoods?
Good question. Yes.
Not so much a question, but I live in a neighborhood at the lower income renter, and it feels like that perspective's not really being voiced here. I look around and see it's mostly homeowners, I think, and from my perspective, we're talking about units, too many units. Those are homes. They're homes for new people moving to the state. You're also making the distinction between affordable and market rate. I would love that, but like the first presentation said, the money's not there. And you're demanding only affordable, the money's not there, nothing gets built, no problems. We are in a housing crisis. If you're in the rental market now, you know that. Market rate housing right now is about 3,000 for a 1-bedroom per month. Right now, I cannot afford that. But I might do it with that sometime. A single family home is $1 million plus. That is luxury. So the last presentation asked, who are we building homes for? Who makes that decision? Who should make that decision? Who are we building homes for? Neighborhood character was historically used as a racist dog whistle to keep certain communities out of it. Cities grow, let them grow, let homes immigrate. Be a good neighbor. As lower than please.
Thank you for sharing your views. I would say that we definitely have tenants that are part of this coalition and the tenant rights organizations that are fighting very hard to make sure that rent controlled units are not demolished and displaced, I think is a really important thing, especially because you can't really replace a rent controlled unit, and who knows what happened to those people. And then, you know, if people get scattered to the winds, and if you have the right to return, who knows when it'll be done, and it's really, really challenging, even if they promise to replace the unit, to get people back into their housing. So it's definitely something we take seriously. I appreciate you raising. Yes.
I think it's important to like realize that like as the street has shifted over time because of development, because of connections, because of the lack of affordable housing, there's like a massive Asia. So it's very, very easy to forget what students want in life. And so like I've done a lot of research and like I've only been through 3 years, but I've done a lot of research as like what this used to be. And look at the Fillmore and just like go over to Fillmore. Everything you see around you is high-rise condos. That was because of redevelopment and upzoning. They destroyed a black neighborhood to go with luxury condos. And they have no character. They got rid of over 25 40 homes. They went up and moved them because they said they was us. And that was racist. So the fact that we have such a lack of affordable housing, and the affordable housing we do have is in the Bayview, where all the black families got pushed out of redevelopment. That should be like that. It should be like equitable diversity. And yeah, I think condos.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes.
Of
Please look up
those
pictures.
2,500, the vast majority were demolished. And fewer than 100 were moved to another location. Most of it just was completely demolished. And I just also want to talk about one thing, which is that who are we building for? So in the 1970s, we spent a certain amount of money on building housing. Our government invested in housing, and our spending for housing and defense was kind of like this. And then our defense spending went like that, and our housing spending went like that. And that's one of the reasons why we're in the situation that we are now, is that we've turned over our housing policy to the private sector. And the private sector builds for profit. I'm not saying that in a judgmental way. That's just a fact. That's how they build. So they're not going to build the housing that we need for the people who need it.
I guess also a good point as somebody who grew up in Coachella, and sort of my family is still going on, is that a lot of people just really into Section 8 vouchers. So if you go in and you apply for housing base, you're Section 8, you not look for it. That's making a lot of people don't know.
Absolutely. Yes.
I have a question about this is in one of the earlier presentations, the map of the population. And I'm wondering about if there's been analysis of, there's a population of San Francisco, and then there's like the universe of San Francisco, which includes the people who live hours away and can't afford something to live there. And there's the universe of people who don't live in the city, but are at the open houses every month trying to find an apartment and can't find one because there aren't enough for reasons that I'm sure we could have a very lively debate about. But how do we think about how that universe of San Franciscans has grown, and universe of people who potentially want to live in the city but don't? So that's very different from the number of people who are there right now.
So the question is, what the slide about population and housing units, does the same thing hold for the greater Bay Area or people connected to the San Francisco economy in some way?
People
I'm
who work
paraphrasing.
here, yeah.
Joseph.
Okay. Sorry, no, it's a great question. So a couple of thoughts on that. One is that, there's a lot of vacant units in San Francisco. And, so I know that basically when people are going and looking for a place to live right now, there's a couple places that you look. The gold standard is to get a rent controlled unit. Because that's what people want. People want a rent controlled unit because you know what your rent increases are gonna be over time. It affords people stability over the long term. It is hard to find a rent controlled unit right now in San Francisco. There's no question about it because that's what people want. There's also the vacant units. There's tons of them in South of Market, for instance, where most of the condo towers are. Or it's the Westerly out in the Sunset. There's tons of vacant units. Those are a little precarious because you get maybe a move-in bonus, maybe you get a month or two free to move in. But you know that there's no rent control in those units, so it can be a little scary, but some people are taking them because it's a place to kind of get a foothold in the city. I think the problem though, is that when you look at the workers who, or even family members and people who either want to live in San Francisco because they work in San Francisco or because they have, community connections, familial connections in San Francisco. The disparity is between what people need and what the cost of housing. And that's why it all kind of keeps coming back to a couple of things. One is the market has built a lot of housing. There's housing out there. It's just not what we can afford. And then the units that we're entitling this kind of 70,000 backlog is not being built, and it's not because of any maliciousness of anybody here. Nobody's trying to block that housing, those 70,000 units from being built. It's that the market's not building that housing because Nate was saying earlier, the rents on the market aren't high enough to support it. So it's a market condition. And when market rate developers are building, they're building for a particular marketplace. They're not building to house, they're not thinking like their business model isn't to try to figure out who's the low wage worker who now has to commute for 2 hours into San Francisco. They're not trying to build for that person. They're trying to build in order to make the profit that they're in business to make. So that's one of the reasons why we keep coming back to this question of how do we advocate for public investment in making sure that we can build the kind of housing that's exactly the kind of housing they were talking about. So like the 47,000 units, for instance, of affordable housing that the state is mandating us to build, nobody's arguing with that number. It would be really difficult to build 47,000 units, but let's put together a plan, let's buy the land, let's get the resources to be able to do it. And so that would start to answer your question. We've tried to survey, that need though, and I would just have to say like there's no hard and fast number of what that need is. We just know that there are thousands of people we know who commute into the city every day for either personal reasons, who would love to live here, or for work, who would also love to live here and be part of the community here. And so yeah, it's incumbent on all of us to kind of come together and advocate to make sure that those resources are available so that we can have new neighbors, so that people who want to live here can live here.
Just on the entitlements question, just because it's related to what you're talking about. There's so much entitled projects out there, so many, like I think of Market and Van Ness, there's a big hole in the ground that I think the city like sold at like a big discount. And I think to like an Australian company, and it's just sitting empty. And is there anything that can be done to like speed along construction, even like the market rate housing, to say like, all right, this has been entitled for 2, 4, 6 years. We're gonna start increasing like requirements to make this like a fire under the developers, but to do something. And maybe if they do wait longer, there's more affordable housing built.
I think there's examples of that. There's a carrot and a stick of how you can deal with people who sit on their entitlements, who speculate, who leave urban blight on their. There was one in the South of Market that was famously really putrid lake, where the developer ran out of money. They had already excavated and they hit the water table and it filled up with water, and it sat as like a public health hazard for maybe 2 years or more. And the city attorney actually took action against them, legal action for, I don't know, spreading disease or something, and they sold it. They found a price. They found the correct price because they were no longer allowed to sit on it and pollute the neighborhood. And now they actually are building something, except they're not gonna do the expensive version of having the underground parking garage or whatever, and they're gonna make it safe. So I do think there's a carrot and a stick.
But I think what also happens is that developers come back to the city and they have all the cards, and they say, oh, well, you know, now this isn't going to pencil out. So we want more stories and fewer affordable units. And the city's approving this over and over again.
That's the story of the Visadero car wash site.
Yeah.
That is a really ugly history.
Is that Mayor Lord that's doing?
It's the planning department. In the fall, there were a couple of examples of the buildings near Van Ness and Market that were asking for, it's not just them. I mean, citywide, there's a lot of examples of projects where they're asking for lower percentage of affordable units, from 18% to 15% to 12%. And the planning department wants to see this stuff built, so they approve it.
But then they still don't necessarily build it. Bruce.
So I just want to circle back to preservation for a second. In 2019, Board of Supervisors passed unanimously legislation called Community Opportunity Purchase Act, and it was designed after the Tenant Opportunity Purchase Act in Washington, D.C. And this allows tenants or nonprofit organizations to have first right of offer and first right of refusal for a building that's going to go up for sale on the market. In San Francisco, this one was designed for minimum of 3, maximum of 24 units. And since 2019, there's been a steady flow of properties like that have gone up on the market, about 20 to 30 unique properties per month. Okay, so if you can count how many months it's been since 2019, you'll see how much housing is available. These are all investment properties that folks like you, folks like me, and in current rent control that would be at risk if those properties were sold. Companies like Veritas went out and, bought a whole lot of these types of buildings and then turned around and started selling them. Hoping that the new, jumpstart the new developers that come in to evict everybody and start either doing a demo and rebuilding it or just, renovating it into that kind of housing. One thing that did come up was for the RENA goals, anybody who's doing this kind of preservation work is actually they're not taking away units on the market. They're not necessarily creating new units, but they're maintaining sustainable units that for at-risk folks. So there is legislation to allow any preservation acquisitions to apply towards the affordable housing part of the RENA goals. It's not going to be a whole lot because there's not a whole lot of money. I mean, those buildings are still expensive. And they have to be penciled out for the people that live there, because otherwise they'll end up having to leave if you can't pencil it out. So it's a bit of a balancing act. But there are, little pockets of opportunity out there to help build and maintain affordable housing.
Thank you, Bruce. Got a question over here.
I'm just curious, do you guys talk about public sector funding? What comes to mind with me is 823 Bryan. If you guys are familiar, it's my understanding that affordable unit is 100% affordable housing site, built largely by nonprofit funds, which I can point to USA, which gave your mayor. Graham, I'm not a fan of blurry, but I read a report that stated that the per unit cost of 823 Bryan was roughly $432,000 versus roughly $750,000 for affordable housing sites built with public sector money. I'm not advocating for asking billionaire nonprofits for money to build housing, but I want to hear you guys talk about how we could reduce the per unit cost of affordable housing. If perhaps CEQA needs to be overhauled, if there are onerous regulations that affordable housing developers would like to do without, is there anything we can do on that front?
I think, I've read that report, but it's been a while. I think the first thing we could do, really honestly, would be to change the way that this zoning is proposed and reserve, certain portions of the allowable zoning only for affordable, and that would reduce the land cost. That's one aspect. The biggest costs are land. That's the biggest, I believe. Materials, labor, the permitting costs are pretty small. When I read that report, I believe that part of the cost savings was simply because of it was philanthropy, you could just do things that you can't do because of the public process. Because it's so hard for nonprofit developers to access the state money and the hoops that they have to go through. So I actually think like streamlining the nonprofit access to funding and getting them, quicker to be able to develop it. And in the city passed streamline for nonprofits that was used for, I think the Shirley Chisholm project used it. But you have to have money, like you have to have the money.
And the CDFIs, which are like banks, nonprofit banks, they basically take government funds or other types of funds and then redistribute it specifically for affordable housing. A lot of them do that. They're not cheap. That money's not cheap because they provide so many services. They make money off of the money that they're given to give away. So sometimes they'll charge, 9% or 10% of your, what you're taking it out on loan. But as Nate was, alluding to, it's a lot easier process to kind of turn it around fairly quickly. So, you can get a project rolling and the money, you can get your cash flow going. You end up securing that property. The key thing is getting title, right? You get title on the property and then those people are either saved from displacement or you're building affordable housing and you got things rolling and you're looking now to refinance in the next 6, 7, 8 years. Because that CDFI money's only good for about 9 years.
Seems like the solution. You say, who are you building it for? The developers are gonna build it for whoever is most profitable for them. Unless for some reason they're stopped from doing that. The only way you're gonna stop from doing that is change the law so that the percentage of affordable housing is concrete and solid. It seems like all this, zoning and everything is one thing. But until you have the law change that mandates a certain amount of affordable housing, and without the wiggle room that we do now, the developers are gonna go for the most profitable thing for them, because that's what they do.
That's right. Capitalism.
So maybe, the approach should be into our legislators and say, make the percentage of affordable housing a solid line and, make laws for that.
How do you
That's
curb,
my suggestion.
how do you curb campaign financing from developers?
What's that?
How do you curb campaign financing from developers then? Those are the folks calling the shots by influencing these elected officials.
I saw a question back here.
Yeah,
Hey,
so I know this is a really broad question for a conversation about affordable housing, but did any of the organizations here tonight talk about a housing question through the lens of what it's like living in a community where there's more housing than anything? So not just like the flowery part of like, like your favorite restaurant is right here, but like, if we're just like building more units, again, at any time, high, low, there is only, even if it's not a housing shortage, like, there is only so much space no matter how much you build, okay? So like, the way I understand it, if the percentage of the community goes up as housing, there might be less restaurant space, there might be less space for product. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because.
Well, eastern neighborhoods.
So, how do I want to put it, like. So this is really good, like explaining the numbers, but I think all of this number question can get really heavy. The simple question is, do you ever talk about data through the lens of what it's like in the neighborhood after housing built? This housing, different housing.
We do, and not only do we talk about it, but we've done some modeling. If you go to our website or, other places, you can see what does it look like when everything, I had some slides, I thought it was extra, but what does it look like when we have, 8 and 16 stories on major corridors? What does it look like? Is it alienating? I mean, you could kind of look at like Market Street from Castro to Church. That was part of the Market Octavia plan. And there's been a lot of tall buildings that have gone in there, and they're arranged like 8, 9 stories. And the ground floor commercial it's really not very pedestrian friendly. And when we lose fine grain, when we lose small businesses, when we lose like the visual diversity, I think this is what you're talking about, right? And we just have one kind of building, which is housing with these big plate windows right to the front property line. It's not a very pleasing pedestrian experience.
I would also suggest the upzoned buildings in the Fillmore area. I think there are like 5 of them that are 25 stories tall. You know the ones, they're by Geary and Fillmore, and just hang out there for a couple hours a day, well, one day. And I mean, they just lost their grocery store. All the small businesses have really tried, and
A lot of empty
I don't
storefronts.
know who lives in those buildings. I never see anybody. But I mean, it feels extremely sterile and like cubicle living and not communal. And I know that we're being told that that's how it's going to be in the future, but why? I mean, when you travel the world, it seems like everyone else does it better than we do,
So let me offer this. In 2008, the city put together a program that they were going to try to solve this exact issue. It was called the Eastern Neighborhoods Community Health Impact Assessment. And this was about the redevelopment of South of Market, where you see all those big buildings that are on now that are exactly what you're saying. It's plate glass window, the front doors are right down up to the sidewalks, and the loss of all the brick and mortar storefronts, okay? 18 months, multi-agency is the first time agencies work together or talk to each other, and members of the public, and members of HANC were involved in that, and many other folks around the city. When it came time, we were done and presenting it to the Planning Commission, they basically turned their nose up at it. And it was a great checklist that kind of looked at what makes a good neighborhood, how much green space, how much walking space. It even took into account wind turbulence, because if you're downtown, you can get a lot of that wind turbulence set up. Was there a library nearby? How many grocery stores, places to hang out, things like that. It was a huge checklist, and that got turned into what is now called the healthy development management tool. You can find it on Wikipedia and read all about the history and whatnot. But if the Planning Commission would adopt something like that and then apply that lens to as they make permitting, they give permitting and looking at the designs, I think you'll see a very different landscape. More talking what you're talking about, what Lisa's.
Yeah, and the city has impact fees, what they're going towards, like, and you know, transportation and then affordable housing, like all the infrastructure that's needed to create like a real estate neighborhood. Where the city just recently cut impact fees for home market rate development. So they're actively, you know, the proposal is to increase the density population, but without the actual sort of population. But if you go down to like the eastern Soma, like my southeast, and like a little bit rebranded the East Pet, it looks nothing like a really, it's just huge condos that are illegal lightless. You know, I think that's the result of, you know, a strong market-driven approach is comes out a lightless, and this doesn't have a lot of this real feel that actually.
Go for it. No, please.
Yeah, so again, sorry, like way too big picture, but my thinking and asking all of that is, here, affordable housing, sometimes like it's easy to think the audience is like people who may want the affordable housing, but I just think like it affects everybody, even the people who are living in these high cost places, like what kind of community are they living in? And like, I don't know, there's a time and place of like hidden rich against the poor, but like, I don't know, I just always try to even tell the rich that like, you're not full straight, just because like you have a higher paycheck, you're still having to think of poor choices, so like, you can live in this like $3 million unit, but like you are still walking the same street as like us poor people. Right, so like I really try to think about like all the facility questions, like what does it really look like at large versus just like, oh, they live in their ivory tower, they have it perfect. No, like they have to shop too, they take transit too. So then you try to think about the planning questions from how does it affect everybody, no matter what the thing is.
I think that's a really great point. I think it's nice to focus on, it's a good thing to focus on a positive vision of what you want and how can we actually build a place that has housing for everyone. And the problem that I have with the formulation of at all income levels, I don't think you mean this, like, I agree with you. I think that we should have an inclusive neighborhood that has housing for people, or that meets the housing needs of everyone, has all different kinds of housing. But the market doesn't build that. It only builds a very narrow kind of real estate product that is, it's only feasible at very high rent. And it has to be basically this enormous rectangle with double loaded corridors that looks like a hotel. And because of the building code, it doesn't look like because of the changes of our laws, they can't build the beautiful neighborhood that we live in. And that's the real problem, I think, because we live in a neighborhood that has rent control and that's the only reason, and affordable housing, which is the only reason it has economic diversity at all. And so I absolutely agree with you that we should have a vision of having all kinds of housing for everyone, all workers at all levels. But I just don't think the market is gonna deliver it, basically.
And there's like little to no senior housing, west of the Vistero, I guess, maybe even Market Street. You know, so talk about like working on demographics in a way. I mean, that's a particular kind of housing. And we've been screaming for that. We even tried in here, they wouldn't allow it. So that was very disappointing.
I get that, I guess, but the last thing I'll say is it's not even about like building question as it is like getting the messaging to all types of people. Because again, like it can be easy to try to talk to people living in affordable housing.
You got any good strategies?
Yeah, well, that's what I'm trying to ask is like, are we talking about it? Like, listen, like you could live in this like bougie, like whatever, how many million a month, but like, again, you're gonna be on the same streets. Like, I don't know, like that's somebody who's like heard anger before. That's the anger. It's like all these business decisions, big sold product that you're being told different than a price tag on. But it's just newer and fancier, and it's the same thing. No,
And how do we align?
yeah, how do you align against like people? It's more about like the residents versus like builders than it is like the higher thing.
I saw Ed first, and then I'll go to you, okay? Yes, Ed.
I'm watching what the county transportation authority has funded the reunification of Japantown building. And, that whole, and filling in the underpass at Fillmore. And I'm standing back saying, is this another real estate development project that's coming up? And so I think I'm just kind of watching it from, and I don't know if anybody has any comments regarding that funding. I mean, that's coming from a 0.5% sales tax. That's the transportation that they wind up doing planning. So I'm just wondering if there's any comments regarding that.
I don't know anything about it.
Sure.
Good question, but I don't have any information. I don't have any information on that.
Let's go to you and we'll wrap it up soon.
$1,000 this month. If they really walk the street, or around and all of them all together around, rather than have to share these. But that's good argument. I find this not sure that they will fine and like, I mean, but so again. And there shouldn't be
I think a lot of American experience the life. I think the idea of a lot of these children suffer very isolated, very homogenized, and then coming to the city is continue living how they want to. And that's just very much the non-suburban person. If I'm trying to get the mind of the suburban person, I'm like, what would I do if I lived in a city?
Yeah, okay, so I was just in the Mission and at 17, they flew this condo monstrosity there forward. And I'm walking down the street and I threw some pieces. Okay. They have a security guard parked outside the building. And the security guard said, there's people living here. If you do that, birds will come. And that just made me wonder, what kind of people are living in that building? And I mean, this is Mission Street and 17. And
Good question.
which is to me, kind of the heart of the Mission. What kind of people are living in these new, very expensive, blocky buildings? What are the lives like when they have security guards like that?
They eat birds. Unfortunately.
Yeah, very insulated. So I'm not sure that that argument will fly, even though I support it.
Yeah, well, think about you quickly just start having a conversation about everything. Start with affordable housing before I know what to talk about.
Okay.
Everything, so.
All right, guys, we got to wrap it up, but thank you for coming and for your patience with time. Thank you, Catherine and Bill.
Well done.
Try to focus on, veterans' houses, preserving veterans' houses. Yeah. Yep. Thank you. Yeah, you know what? I try to stay with everything that will come to the moment of you. But, yeah.